The New Orleans Saints and head coach Kellen Moore face a critical moment that they must answer, and the Buffalo Bills stand in their way. We got all that and a little bit of lagniappe for you on today's episode of Locked On Saints.
You are Locked On Saints, your daily New Orleans Saints podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is good, Who Dat Nation and Who Dat family? I am your host, your friend, Ross Jackson, New Orleans native, your New Orleans Saints expert and credentialed member of the media covering those New Orleans Saints as a Saints beat writer over at LouisianaSports.net. And on today's episode of Locked On Saints, the Saints defense is going to be put to the test, particularly in the run game. We'll dive into our all-22 notes, take a look at how they fared against Seattle and what it tells us as the Saints head to Buffalo. We'll also take a look at our all-22 notes from the New Orleans Saints offense, which was limited not just because of the score deficit, but what Seattle did as well. But we're going to kick everything off with the Saints and head coach Kellen Moore, who face a critical moment and have a lot to prove. And in order for them to prove anything, they're going to have to do it against the Super Bowl probable Buffalo Bills. We got all that coming up for you on today's show. We appreciate you very much. Whether it's your first time or your next time, being here with us this time and making us your first listen, being an everydayer here on the show, which is a proud part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel, where right now new customers can bet just $5. And if that first $5 bet wins, you get $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. Head over to FanDuel.com to get started today. The New Orleans Saints, and most of all, head coach Kellen Moore, face a crucial moment here as they get ready to go and take on the Buffalo Bills. And oh, don't worry, they've got a lot to prove, especially after their big blowout loss to the Seattle Seahawks. And they just have to prove it against one of the blue blood programs, one of the best teams in the NFL, the probable two-time MVP or back-to-back MVP, Josh Allen potentially here in 2025. It's going to be a tough game for the New Orleans Saints. You're not going to find a lot of folks that are going to be picking the New Orleans Saints to beat the Buffalo Bills, but that's not what it's going to take for Kellen Moore and the New Orleans Saints to prove something. You'll remember that in the first 2 weeks of the season, the Saints went up against okay teams in the Arizona Cardinals and the San Francisco 49ers, and they hung in there in those games. They were within one score of either tying or potentially taking the lead in both of those games. And even though they came out of those matchups with losses, you still walked away going, you know what? That was a competitive team. That was a team that not necessarily didn't get a moral victory, we shouldn't say, because players don't like moral victories. Teams don't like moral victories. We get all that. But they showed heart. They showed fight. They showed grit. They were the underdog, all this other stuff. They were able to walk away with that. They were to walk away feeling really good with that. And fans walked away feeling really good with that. That was not the case up against the Seattle Seahawks in a game where they were embarrassed, overwhelmed, and underprepared, as we've discussed here on the show. And I'm not going to hark on that too much. We're going to go into all 22 notes here in a little bit. But the big thing is that that was a statement moment about the New Orleans Saints. It was the first time that we saw this team look like the preseason projections that said that this team would be the worst team in the NFL. And so now the Saints get an opportunity, and a big one at that, to prove that that's not who they are, to prove that that is not the way that they're going to operate throughout the season, that what you saw on week 3 or in week 3's matchup against the Seattle Seahawks would not be wholly representative or holistically representative of what the Saints will be by season's end. And so this game up against the Buffalo Bills presents an interesting and unique opportunity for proving that for 2 reasons. Number one, it's going to be hard to do it. So if you do it and you show fight, right? Again, you don't have to win, but you show fight, you hang around, you don't look completely outmatched, you come in prepared, you do all the things that you didn't do up against Seattle, even without winning, it leaves no confusion. There's no mistake to be made about it. There's not a version of the Buffalo Bills team that isn't good. There's not a version of this New Orleans Saints team that doesn't have something to prove. And therefore, if you are the team that has something to prove and you prove something against a really, really good team, the best team or one of the best teams in the NFL, there's nobody around that can, they'll try, but that can take that away from you. the number two part is that the Buffalo Bills have some vulnerabilities that Kellen Moore should look to attack. And so if Kellen Moore can actively find ways on the offensive side to attack those vulnerabilities, that goes to another showing of momentum, another showing of fight, and another showing of, well, something different than what we saw last week with that New Orleans Saints loss in Seattle. So I'm not saying that the Saints have to go out there to win to prove anything. I don't expect them to win. I'll tell you that right now. Joe Marino, the phenomenal Joe Marino of Locked On Bills, and I are going to do our crossover episode tomorrow. I'm going to pick the Saints to lose. When we do the Saints squad on tonight, I'm going to pick the Saints to lose. Like they're not the better team in this scenario. But what we saw from the Miami Dolphins last week on Thursday Night Football is that the Buffalo Bills do have some vulnerabilities. The run game in particular, let me be very clear about what I mean to say by that. The Bills' run defense in particular, the rushing offense is phenomenal, but their run defense is one of those places. And Kellen Moore is the run game guy. Remember, he's the one that took the Philadelphia Eagles after a couple of weeks in 2024 and said, you know what, we got to change something. And so then they built everything around Saquon Barkley, and then bang, they took off after that. And while I don't expect the Saints to have any portion of this season where they quote unquote take off, because that's not what rebuilding teams do, and the Saints are a rebuilding team, I do think that this is an opportunity to prove something. I do think that this game against the Buffalo Bills is an opportunity for Kellen Moore to say, hey, I got this. And helping this team battle against a very good opponent that has some vulnerable things to be able to build some confidence going up against, if you're able to take advantage of it, considering the fact that Buffalo did have some of those things, those vulnerabilities that reared their ugly head on Thursday Night Football up against the Miami Dolphins. However, they're also going to be hosting the New Orleans Saints on 10 days of rest. Not ideal. Not ideal. So expectations should remain low in this situation, but an opportunity to show that whoever that was out on the field for the New Orleans Saints, or not whoever that was out on the field in the New Orleans Saints, but whoever that was out on the field against the Seattle Seahawks is not wholly representative of who the New Orleans Saints will be here in 2025. So that's what I'm going to be looking for here. Can Kellen Moore keep his guys competing after a loss like that? Can Kellen Moore save the belief of this team in itself after a shellacking in Seattle? Can the New Orleans Saints prove that they can be a better team than what we saw on Sunday up against Seattle? They have every opportunity ahead of them to prove that, but this one up against the Buffalo Bills might be the most important because it can be the most convincing. If they can hang around and lose by anything less than the 16.5-point spread that FanDuel already has them as underdogs with, that gives them a chance to prove that they are a growing, improving, and they are a growing and improving team, and that they're led by a coach that's willing to reflect on what didn't go well and find ways to make it better on a week-to-week basis. We saw that week 1 into week 2, particularly with the run game. Let's see what happens now, week 3 into week 4 for Kellen Moore and this Saints team. And this Saints team on offense was very limited in its passing game, and it didn't all have to do with the scoring deficit. We got that coming up for you next as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode of Locked On Saints is brought to you by our friends over at Mazda. Mazda crafts cars for those who do more than simply move. Mazda delivers confidence in every ride with more IIHS Top Safety Pick Plus awards than anyone else. As of August of 2025, from footwork to breathwork, athletes sweat every one of the details. Mazda brings this same intention to how they craft every model. You're going to be able to find everything that you're looking for, including those metallic accents, as well as the available Napa leather upholstery. It'll do everything to turn everyday drives into anything but, from smooth handling to intuitive controls. And with all-wheel drive standard on every crossover SUV, you can drive with the confidence that you need through any season. Like every player that you know and love, we sweat every detail because when you make every move count, impossible becomes relevant. Mazda, move and be moved. All right, family, it was more than just a multi-score lead that had the New Orleans Saints offense down in the dumps. The Seattle Seahawks took away a lot of options for New Orleans when it came to them trying to throw themselves back into a football game, which is truly what they did. The Saints did attempt to dial up some big plays down the field. However, those plays just simply weren't available to them. And a big part of the reason is because of how Seattle played against those big shots that were dialed up. So with every passing play throughout the majority of the game, there were one, if not two, downfield concepts that were trying to open up this passing game a little bit more and allow you to be able to get yourself back into a football game where you've gotten dug into quite a hole in that situation. Now, there were some curious decisions, particularly in the second half, where you have this large deficit and the Saints continue to run the football. I get the idea there, right? You're trying to stay with the mixed down approach of rundowns and passing downs and taking advantage of what you might be able to do there, creating some potential play action opportunities for you to be able to take some of those shots downfield. So set up the run and then build off of that an opportunity to throw yourself back into the football game. But that opportunity went away very quickly, and the Seattle Seahawks kind of just said, yeah, run all you want. That's fine. And effectively did well in defending it too. The Saints were, both teams were under 3 yards per carry coming out of this matchup, depending upon how far you're willing to move your decimals there. But one of the things that Seattle also did was that they played a lot with multiple safeties over the top of the defense, or over the top of the offense. 53.7% of the time, Seattle was in cover 3. When they weren't in cover 3, 13% of the time they were in cover 6. When they weren't at either of those, 16.7% of the time they were in cover 4. So let's define all of that, right? Cover 3 and cover 6, which are similar but not, but each have 3 deep defenders that are trying to take away deep passing opportunities. So you can't, you're putting a guy in the middle-ish of the field, or at least you're splitting it up into thirds-ish. Basically, the way that cover 6 works is that one player's responsibility is one half of the field, and then the other half of the field becomes 2 players' responsibility, typically the field side as opposed to the boundary side. And so you saw a lot of 3 DBs over the top or 4 DBs over the top in terms of those cover 4 opportunities as well, where they effectively welcomed the Saints to just simply run the football if they wanted to. And that is evident in the way that Seattle did not stack the box. In fact, the Saints right now, despite some of the struggles, despite these struggles that the Saints are having in the run game right now, they have faced a league-leading 69.6% light boxes. That means 6 or fewer defenders in the box. And that's a little concerning. Like, if you're not able to run the football against that, then that's because you're dealing with your issues on the front, right? In the trenches, on the line of scrimmage. And that was evident in this game as well. Not only was the passing game kind of limited in terms of the ability of Seattle taking things away over the top, the Saints averaged just 0.85, so less than 1 yard before contact per rush. And that has been the story of the Saints so far this season. They are not a team that is creating a lot for their running backs. Instead, the running backs are having to create. This is one of the first times we've really seen Saints running backs well over the 3-yard mark, or at least going into week 3, the 3-yard mark in yards after contact. That's typically not been the game here in New Orleans. And so this game where Seattle was effectively saying, here's this light front for you, feel free to run against it all you want, we're just going to focus on taking away the passing game, that's all tuned into the fact that there was a multi-score deficit by the time that the Saints got into halftime, where they were down 38-6. But that doesn't mean that you throw all of this tape out the window. You still look to see what did they try to do and why didn't it work. And a big part of why it didn't work was because of the fact that Seattle was willing to sit back and take things away, and the Saints haven't been playing the sort of risky and aggressive style that would attack even when the coverage is there. I mean, you think about certain plays that you've seen against the Saints so far this year. The Juwan Jennings 40-plus yard catch and run, that was against cover 2. That was with 2 deep safeties over the middle and with a deep linebacker, or with a linebacker getting depth as well in coverage. But Mac Jones finds Juwan Jennings right over the top of Pete Werner, who stumbled or slipped, which we saw a bunch of in the Caesars Superdome throughout that game. and then that turns into a big catch and run touchdown. And so at some point, you've got to be willing to take the risk. At some point, you've got to be risky and throw even though the coverage is there. And so you're having to figure some things out here if you're the New Orleans Saints. And so this is where you'd like to see more creative concepts that are going to start to create some separation for these receivers. This is where you'd like to see the receivers themselves begin to create some of that separation and find and work their way open. And in particular, you can have cover 2, cover 4, cover 3, cover 6, cover 9, whatever it is that you want to play out there, cover 1, doesn't matter. If you get into second action football where the quarterback is scrambling and you roll into a scramble drill, that no longer matters. You need to win those opportunities. And that was a big thing that Spencer Rattler and Kellen Moore each said that they were going to be focused a lot on over the course of this week in practice, is really working on those scramble drills and looking for opportunities to be able to take advantage of some of the second action that will get there. You'll remember the Saints' first big play that they gave up against Seattle on the defensive side was a second action play. Brian Brzee gets into the backfield. He gets a hand on Sam Darnold. Can't finish the sack. Sam Darnold scrambles out to his left. Jackson Smith-Njigba moves to that same side of the field. Move and flow with your quarterback. Bang, they connect for a 29-yard gain on what should have been a sack in the backfield. And so if you can put your offense in place to be able to take advantage of some of those second actions, some of those scramble drills, some of those things, then I think you're going to be in a better place here if you're the New Orleans Saints. The Buffalo pass rush didn't do as well a job as you might have expected against a pretty subpar Miami offensive line, harkening back in the days where you as a Saints fan have probably watched the New Orleans Saints defense in some of its worst years, going up against a very, very hurt Atlanta offensive line and still not being able to give pressure. It seems like that was kind of the same frustration between the AFC East rivals over there with the Buffalo Bills and the Miami Dolphins. And so if the Saints are going to get time where Tua Tagovailoa got over 2.7 seconds to throw, with the Saints get the ball out very quickly. Spencer Rattler, 2.49 seconds time to throw, second fastest in the NFL of all quarterbacks with more than 50 passing attempts or 50 or more passing attempts. If you're able to buy him some time and give him an opportunity to be able to get to working in the backfield, play a little bit of that playground style, you might find your way to going out there and getting some of those big plays in. But the Saints have not been a big play offense. They have not been a consistent enough offense. The targets are there. The passing attempts are there. It's all reflected in Spencer Rattler's air yards as well, who actually had, even in this one game against Seattle, the air yards per attempt were higher for Rattler than they were for Darnold. But the issue is that you're not finding the efficiency there and you're not finding the production there. And so if you're able to get this Saints run game going against the 32nd ranked, last ranked run defense of the Buffalo Bills, then maybe, just maybe, it'll start to open up some things for you on the offensive side to be able to take advantage of. Play action, for instance, but then also those second action plays are going to be a big part of what tells the Saints story Sunday at Orchard Park. Coming up next, the New Orleans Saints defense desperately needs to get things going. We got that coming up for you as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode of Locked On Saints brought to you by friends over at FanDuel, and FanDuel is making sure that you're ready for every kickoff every week with a can't miss offer. Right now, new customers can bet $5 on your first bet, and if that first bet wins, you'll get $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. You can get started today at FanDuel.com. Those $300 can then be used for odds, lines, props, all the things that you love, but also same-game parlays, live betting, which is one of my favorites. If I see a really good college football team in particular down early and that line is moving the way that I like, that's an easy one to jump in on. Lots of good stuff there. And if you're a first-time bettor, $5 down on the money line for the Buffalo Bills might make a lot of sense. They're 16.5-point favorites at home up against the road dog New Orleans Saints. So are you ready to get started? Well, just download the FanDuel app today by heading over to FanDuel.com, and that's where you'll get started. That's FanDuel.com to place your first $5 bet. Let's get it, Who Dat Nation. The New Orleans Saints are going to be tested on defense by what has been a fantastic Buffalo Bills offensive attack headed into next week's game, and nothing about what we saw against the Seattle Seahawks is going to give you much confidence as we continue going through our all 22 notes from the game. Look, I'll say this. The Saints' run defense actually kind of impressed me a little bit being very clear here, in the context of the matchup. There were some breakaway runs, or let's call them chunk runs and things like that. But overall, the Saints defense, when tasked with stopping the outside zone run of Clint Kubiak, the former Saints offensive coordinator, and the Seattle Seahawks, they did a good job stopping that. Seattle ran the football 33 times for 87 yards, averaged just 2.6 yards per run. Now, the amount of those yards that were picked up in the first half versus the second half, that is all very important context. And so out of the Seahawks' 33 rushes, 24 of them came in the second half. They only had 8 rushes in the first half. So understand that we're really talking about a team that was already ahead multiple scores. And so what the Saints defense did in terms of stopping the run game is to be taken with a little bit of scrutiny and a bit of a grain of salt for certain. I want to acknowledge that 100%. However, the Saints could have been awful, and they were not. The Saints allowed just 3.3 yards per rush in the second half over the course of those 21 rushes, and a long of just 10 yards. 5 first downs over the course of that time as well. They also forced a turnover in the run game. We'll get to Quincy Riley here in just a moment because I thought that he was particularly impressive in his NFL debut. The Saints' run game, what worked for them was gap integrity and run fits. They did a very good job of actually filling the gaps that they needed to and keeping Seattle to a point to where actually one of the things that head coach Mike Macdonald said after the game on the day after press conference was that there was a need for Seattle to improve when it came to their run blocking, particularly on those outside rushes. So I thought New Orleans did, for all intents and purposes, and what it is that we know that outside run defense could do to a bad rushing defense, they did a good job defending that, even in a situation where they could have just flat out given up. Remember, it was 38-6 going into halftime. 32-point deficit, the largest for the New Orleans Saints in a first half since 2005. And not far off of the largest in their NFL history, which was a 35-point gap back in 1979. Those are not numbers you want to be repeating, of course, if you're the Saints. And so to see them in a moment where in the second half, the majority of Seattle's offense was run, because they had secured a very comfortable lead at that point, perfectly logical. That Saints defense could have thrown their hands up. That Saints defense could have walked around feeling bad for itself. That Saints defense could have given up, and they didn't do that. And to me, I thought that that was a good thing to see because that run defense, they're going to need that same attitude up against the Buffalo Bills, the number 1 rushing offense in the NFL and the number 2 rushing yards running back, in the league in James Cook, who to me is the number 1 running back in the NFL. James Cook, to me, is the best running back in the league right now. Derrick Henry's really good, still, shockingly, at this point. But James Cook is incredible. And I know Jonathan Taylor leads the NFL in rushing yards right now, but Jonathan Taylor is always a big mystery, big what if when it comes to Jonathan Taylor. And the Indianapolis Colts offense is just kind of this sneaky, crazy thing that's happening right now. I feel like Indianapolis might be on their way to a 2024 New Orleans Saints moment here soon. So James Cook, what makes him so good is that he's not afraid to make the next choice. And Joe Brady, what makes him so good is that he's not afraid to give James Cook multiple choices. James Cook in the zone run game, really, really good. The Saints did a very good job of defending that. But Kenneth Walker, Zach Charbonnet, those guys, or I guess it wasn't Zach Charbonnet last week, but those running backs over in Seattle are not what I would call James Cook. Because James Cook can take the third option in a run game and reverse field and leave you wondering where he just went somehow or another as he prances into the end zone. Like, he's that good. And of course, we can't forget Josh Allen in the run game as well. And so that to me is going to be a huge test for New Orleans. That's another place where Brandon Staley, who faces a crucial moment for his team, right? Not that any decisions are going to be made. Nobody's firing Brandon Staley. Nobody's firing Kellen Moore. I'm not saying that. But what I'm saying is those guys have things to prove after that blowout loss to Seattle. And so now you get into this game Here's a chance. You're going up against the best run defense in the NFL, rushing offense in the NFL. Can you stand up to it and be competitive against it? If you can, again, there's no mistaking that for anybody. That would be a positive showing. The coverage for the New Orleans Saints continues to be concerning. And now you're about to go up against Josh Allen, who does an incredibly good job of being whatever quarterback his team needs him to be on a week-to-week basis. And so, yes, he's got the biggest arm in the league and he can, put together these explosive plays and all these other things. But also, if you need him to dink and dunk against the defense, he will dink and dunk against the defense. He does not have that kind of ego that keeps him from doing those things. And so New Orleans is going to have to be prepared to defend, adjust, and defend again. And they did not do a good job of that up against Seattle. Seattle, they would defend, but then once Seattle got into second action, the Saints could not defend again. They were lost in those situations. And that's what happens when you have a very young secondary. You have a second-year starter in Kool-Aid McKinstry. You have Alontae Taylor, who's just getting back to his role as a slot corner, and now is also playing on the outside in some situations. You have Quincy Riley, who's rotating in. You have a rookie safety in Jonas Sanker. They're going to get tested a lot up against this Buffalo Bills defense, and we certainly saw that up against Seattle as well. So the big note there being that the Saints really struggled to react and adjust. That's a big thing that they'll need to get fixed as they move forward, especially with the Buffalo Bills up next. Coming up tomorrow, crossover Thursday, cannot wait. Joe Marino and I, Locked on Bills, Locked on Saints, we're going to break down everything you need to know about the Saints and Bills matchup for Week 4. We appreciate you very much, as always, making us a part of your day, part of your routine, for saying yes to me on the show. If you see me, please say hi. If you need anything else around your New Orleans Saints in between these episodes, make sure you follow me on your favorite social media at Ross Jackson, NOLA. Hit me up. Let me know how the family's doing. Let me know how you're living. Let me know how you're momming them. And trust Who Dat Nation, I'll holla at you.